can see here the presentations we had last week, and I put the QR code there. You can find the presentations from last week on the event website. Yeah, so today we will hear from Cabo Verde, Papua New Guinea, and Paraguay, possibly also Haiti and Ecuador. The presentations will be followed by discussion at the end, where we will really then hear from the partner organizations on possible avenues for support. And I would like to also ask those representatives from UN4NAPs partner organizations in the room to very briefly just introduce yourselves, maybe with the first name and the name of your organization. Maybe you could just get up so we also know who you are and everyone knows it. Thank you. Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Hi, very good afternoon. My name is Himanshu Shekhar, and I'm here on behalf of United Nations University. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shana Tabrizi. I'm here on behalf of WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, and the WIPO Green Team.
Hello everyone, my name is Antonis Kolimenakis and I'm representing the World Health Organization.
Hello dear colleagues, my name is Olga Andreeva and I'm representing Secretariat of United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Thank you.
Anyone else? You? No, I'm with the Secretariat.
Jesus Alvarado, NDC Partnership.
Hello, Carlos Uribe, United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction.
Chagozilde representing UNFPA, UN Population Fund.
Thank you all very much, and thanks a lot for being here. We'll also keep monitoring the online space because we might have some colleagues additionally joining online. This map just gives a brief snapshot on the NAPs, on the countries that we will hear from today and their the submission of their NAPs. As you see, all of them have submitted the NAP within the last 1 to maximum 3 years, with Paraguay having submitted the first NAP in 2020 and an update in July last year. Just a very quick introduction to this session. As you are all well aware, NAPs have become the main vehicle for implementing adaptation at the national level, which was established with decision 1CP16 and enabling countries to formulate and implement NAPs, identifying medium and long-term adaptation needs and develop and implement strategies and programs to address those needs. The main objectives of NAPs are, on the one hand, to reduce vulnerability and build capacity, adaptive capacity and resilience, and on the other, to also facilitate the integration of adaptation into relevant development plans at the national and subnational levels. You will find all the NAPs that have been submitted to the UNFCCC on NAP Central. To date, we have 45 countries that have submitted their NAP, and there is a great need to accelerate both the work on NAP formulation and also implementation. On UN4NAPs, this is an initiative that we launched in the Secretariat 2 years ago, and it is a rapid technical backstopping initiative specifically for national adaptation plans and facilitates technical assistance to all countries that need such assistance either for the formulation or implementation of their NAP. At the moment, we have 46 organizations that are part of the initiative that you can see here on the screen. We also have a few of the profile documents that are also on the website. We've printed a few that are here in the room if you would like to have a look at the profiles of the different organizations. In terms of the different categories of technical assistance that we facilitate through the initiative, there are basically 4 such categories. One is emails that, or requests that organizations can respond to via email in an easy exchange. Secondly, requests for specific data or tools that countries may need in a formulation or implementation of their NAP. Thirdly, longer-term engagement, including capacity building, and as a 4th category, also the review of draft NAPs and other documents where we then seek the inputs from organizations, and they can then provide suggestions based on the respective areas of expertise. And speaking of those areas of expertise, this is just a quick word cloud to give you an impression on the kinds of themes that the participating organizations work on, to show you the breadth and the different areas of work. And specifically on the question of NAP implementation, just to show you a few examples of what participating organizations are offering here. For example, identifying best available science for including the implementation of adaptation, developing knowledge and information systems, support for the use and application of frontier technologies, support in research and systematic observations, and finally, also importantly, the design of implementation strategies. We have received different requests for technical assistance from countries. This is just to give you a quick snapshot. And we also have a few brochures here in the room where you find more details and examples of such assistance that has been facilitated through the initiative. In how does this work? We invite countries to submit via email their request for technical assistance, ideally with the national focal point immediately from the first exchange on in copy, so that we know it is coordinated at the national level. And we will then seek that assistance through the network of partners and identify those that are most relevant to support you. And yeah. And with that, I believe I would like to ask the presenters to join us here. So Mr. Rodriguez from Cabo Verde, Jonah from Papua New Guinea. Oh, sorry. And Agustin. Thank you. All right, we will first hear from Cabo Verde on challenges in the NAP implementation that is being launched right now in the country. So we will just switch presentations.
Okay, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting Cabo Verde to be part of this side event. My name is Alexandre Rodrigues, and I work at the Ministry of Environment and Agriculture and Environment. And I will present you the current challenge in the implementation of the National Adaptation Plan from Cabo Verde and the technical assistance needs. But before speaking about NAP, it's very important that you understand the context of elaboration of our NAP. And in the next slide, I will present you the main vulnerabilities of Cabo Verde, closely related to its geographical localization in the Sahel region, characterized by an arid climate. First of all, we have the water scarcity. The average precipitation in Cabo Verde varies between 100 and 200 millimeters per year, so which does not favor groundwater recharge. The second is the low resilience agriculture. Agriculture is still very dependent on rainfall, which increases the vulnerability of both the sector and the people who live for this activity, which represents about 35% of the population of Cabo Verde. And the third vulnerability is the fragile ecosystems. We are aware of the fragility of the island's ecosystems and the biodiversity. Semaliness, fragmentation, and insularity represent the main factor of this vulnerability. And another vulnerability is related to the sea level rise. It's linked to the extensive coastal area that we have in Cabo Verde, and the fact that more than 80% of the population and principal infrastructures located in the coastal areas. Another vulnerability is the low resilience of the infrastructures that we have in the country and the reduced financial resilience. This is it's not only, but this is the most important vulnerability that we have to face, and it is to respond to these vulnerabilities that we will elaborate on NAP, but we will see in the next slides, we will see how we get to the NAP. This one is just to make the context about our country and what the IPCC report tell us about the future situation of our country. So this graph show how Cabo Verde will be affected by an increase in global average temperature about from 1.5 and 2 degrees. We found that in the case of Cabo Verde, for example, the average temperature will increase between 1.5 and 3 degrees, and the precipitation will decrease by 10% at the end of the cycle. And the projection also reveals that the sea level could rise between 13 to 56 centimeters. And this sea level rise for the island countries, it's prohibitive. It's just that, it's prohibitive. I told in the previous slide that 80% of population and of infrastructure are in the coastal area. So this is a very, next slide, please. So this is a very catastrophic, these have a very catastrophic impacts in Cabo Verde. Among several impacts, I here choose just 3 then to represent the impact that the climate change will have in our country. I will highlight here the impacts on agriculture, fishery, and food security, access to water and sanitation, and the loss from biodiversity and ecosystems. Next. So, bearing in mind a strong climate policy where we decide to be part of the solution, I thought this situation, we want to be part of the solution, and we update our NDC committing to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by up to 24% in 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality in 2050 without taking our obligation into account to adapt to the effects of the climate change. Next, please. And at the NDC, we have 9 contributions or 9 commitments for adaptation. And this commitment, it's in the sector of water and sanitation, strengthen the food security through regenerative agriculture, strengthen the food security through regenerative fisheries, increasing marine protected areas by 50% by 2030, protect coastal zones and marine resources, using territorial planning as an ally in adapting and mitigating climate change, mitigate disaster risks and climate-related vulnerabilities, and reduce climate-related health risks. So, next, please. So, is to reinforce the implementation of NDC commitments for adaptation and to increase the resilience of the country, ecosystems, people, and their livelihoods. We will also develop our national adaptation plan. Next, please. And the main objective of the UNFCCC is first to create an enable environment to facilitate the integration of adaptation into planning and budgeting. Second, to improve the capacity to manage and share data and information access, technology, and finance for adaptation. And the third is implement adaptation action for greater resilience of the most vulnerable people. And the main lessons that we learn in design and implementing the NAP is that it's essential to ensure the following four principal aspects. First, it's the human and institutional training, a plan from local to national, inclusive and the participation of all, including youth, men, women, politicians. It's very important to imply the decision makers in this process, private sector, civil society, and others, and long-term vision. But this long-term vision have to go together to immediate responses, because the vulnerable people, of course, we need this long-term vision, but the vulnerable people must that we act now. So we have to have this long-term vision, but we have to put in our program the immediate response to respond to the vulnerability of the people. And the main challenge to implement this NAP, it's, we are now in the first year of the implementation of our NAP. At this moment, our NAP is about 36 million euros, the budget. We have at this moment 10 million euros with the cooperation with the Luxembourg government, who is helping us to implement the first step of our NAP. And this first step is about to reinforce the communication about adaptation and about the climate change, training people. It's not just training the institution, but training the civil society, reinforced support to the university that they can make more research about climate change. And make it at the local level 5 adaptation action to give the first example how we can implement the measures in adaptation in the country. So the challenges is, first is the reinforcement of systematic observation to produce accurate climate data to support planning. This is very important, and for aliens it's very important to have a very lack of data. It's important to have a very strong systematic observation to produce accurate data. And second is the assessment of vulnerabilities at different levels and sectors. This is important for planning, because if we don't know very well how deep goes our vulnerability, it's very complicated to have a strong plan. And third, development of systems for monitoring, evaluating, and learning the impact of adaptation measures. This is another issue very important because we have to justify the money that we receive. So it's important we know if the money we put in for each measure is making effect. It's really make people more resilient. If we need to know if this investment that we did, that we do, really reduce the vulnerability. So we need to make the monitorization. And the biennial report we have to report in the biennial report this issue. So it's important we have this system. And the fourth, it's reinforcement of climate observation and the modeling capacity and access to climate scenarios. We are working in this issue. We have a good support from Brazil with the climate scenarios, and we work together with the Meteorological Institute to reinforce the capacity to modeling and to have access to climate scenarios. And fifth, it's capacity building to develop a nature-based strategy and solution for adaptation, because the money it will be not enough. So it's important to see what the nature can give us and take the advantage of this opportunity that nature gives us. So, but we need capacity building to identify this solution in the nature. So it's important to have this capacity building. And the last is training and technology to strengthen the resilience of primary productive sector, principally agriculture sector. We have 35% of population in the agriculture sector. So we need to strengthen this area and to have technology to help us to use less water, for example, in the agriculture, to protect our agriculture, to make more profit for the most vulnerable people. So this is the presentation that I bring to you from Cabo Verde. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra. I believe we have time for 2 to 3 immediate follow-up questions, so I'm just going to come. Okay. So maybe some of the partners also, or otherwise also, of course, country representatives, if you have some if you have some immediate follow-up questions before we move on to the next presentation. And of course, there will be time for discussion at the very end. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tania Guillen. I'm from the Climate Service Center, Germany. My question is regarding the figure you mentioned. You said that to implement the NAP, you have calculated that you need $36 million. So my question is, how did you calculate that? Because as far as I understand, this is one of the main issues for countries, like to assess the needs on adaptation. So it's how did you do that, the process? Maybe if you can briefly mention.
Thank you, and let's take one more question. Yeah, Himanshu?
So maybe sort of a remark from our side. We are very happy to see the process being developed by Cabo Verde, and we would like to share the experiences we have had in dealing and supporting other countries, particularly along the area of vulnerability assessment across scales, on capacity building, and particularly on the nature-based solution. So of course there is a larger bandwidth of issues there where we can be of help, and we are very happy to explore what exactly would be needed. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, also Himanshu, for that offer of support. And just to add, I noted there are several points that will be also possibly interesting for some of the organizations that are part of the network, and that we will then forward this to. So please You have the floor.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the words. Of course, we will enter in contact about the organizations to know how each one can help us to strengthen the implementation of our national adaptation plan. About the budget, we have the support to the National Directorate of Plan, but the most important is that if we read the national plan from Cabo Verde, you will see the most important from the implementation of this NAP is to make that each institution at the local and the national level integrating in their plannings, sectorial plannings, the measures about adaptation. So what we did is just to help us to identify the adaptation measures at the local level and estimate the cost from this adaptation measure. It's an estimated value and this budget, at the end with the support now with the Luxembourg, with 10 million euros with the Luxembourg, we will make this estimation more accurate because we will evaluate now deeper the vulnerability. We will elaborate a map from vulnerability for each country, and we will deeper in the measures to refine this budgeting. But it's identifying in each locality the principal activities from adaptation and estimate the cost from this measure. And of course, trying to don't put more cost or additional cost from the local administration, because you saw in the second slide, for example, the money it's another vulnerability that we have. A small country depend on the support from the other countries. We just export fishes. We don't have anything to export. We import almost 90% of what we consume in Cabo Verde. So this is a great challenge.
Thank you very much, and we will also have time at the end to take more suggestions of support, especially from the partners. With that, I would like to suggest that we move to Papua New Guinea with Jonah. You have the floor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, organizers, the UNFCCC Secretariat, for the invitation to come and speak on Papua New Guinea's National Adaptation Plan, and good afternoon to everyone. Just for your background information, as you have seen on the in the introductory slides where our colleagues from the Secretariat showed there that PNG launched its National Adaptation Plan this year on the 5th of April, and you know, it's just maybe 2 or 3 months away since we launched. So basically, I'll be just presenting to you, you know, some of the key outcomes and objectives of the National Adaptation Plan, and perhaps towards the end of the slide, you'll see some of the key challenges, barriers that we see that are challenging in terms of, you know, achieving some of the targets, outcomes under the NAP. Next slide, please. So just to give you a context on the Papua New Guinea's NAP, so you will see that, you know, the NAP will support the government's intervention to look at achieving the 3 following areas. So that is one is to look at strengthening our institutional and technical capacities in terms of implementing our NAPs. Number 2 is to look at effective integration of climate change adaptation into national and subnational planning and budgetary processes. And 3 is to look at designing and sequencing activities like developing project proposals within key priority government sectors, which I will allude to later, where to support these sectors in terms of accessing climate finance. Next slide, please. So for us, there are 3 key objectives and 3 outcome areas. One is to look at basically coordination, having a good coordination mechanism between the national government. I, for one, work with the Climate Change and Development Authority, which is the mandated government authority that looks at climate change issues in the countries, and we work with our implementing partners, our key implementing partners, which are the sectors, to look at how we can coordinate better to be able to mainstream climate change adaptation within their budgets, their plans, so that they can be able to build their resilience, build climate-proofing infrastructure and so forth in agriculture, water and so forth. Number 2 is to also ensure that climate risks are integrated. We see that many of the sectors within Papua New Guinea are, doing, business as usual without considering any climate change risks and impacts. So that is also one key area which we want to focus on, ensuring that our sectors do identify what are the main risks, vulnerabilities within the sectors, so that they can be able to address those risks within the sectors. And of course, financing framework is one of the key outcome areas to ensure that we support these key sectors to be able to access climate finance, so that they can be able to implement climate proofing projects within the sectors, whether it's our infrastructure project, agriculture project, health, transport projects. And that is where we see that they can, the NAP provides that guidance for them to be able to ensure that they can access the climate financing resources that are out there. Next slide. So for us, when we were developing the National Adaptation Plan, we ensured that the National Adaptation Plan was country-owned, and it followed the national frameworks. It was aligned with the national frameworks that we have in the country, including our medium-term development plan number 3. MTDP4 is currently being developed. So in alignment with these national frameworks, we wanted to ensure that, key sectors are identified, and, the different frameworks that we have under our, jurisdiction are followed, so that, it's country-owned, country-driven, and we wanted to ensure that the needs and priorities that were reflected in the NAP are basically, the needs that we want to address in the country. So these are the 9 priority areas for adaptation, and the 4 key priority sectors that this NAP, the National Adaptation Plan, is focusing on is 1, on infrastructure. So we have the Department of Works and Highways, that is the lead government entity, implementing entity. We have the Department of Transport, which is the lead agency that looks after the transport sector. We have the National Department of Health, which looks after the health sector. And then we have the Department of Agriculture and Livestock, which looks after the agriculture sector. So these are the 3 main priority sectors: 1, infrastructure; 2, transport; 3, health; and 4 is agriculture. So for the first phase of our National Adaptation Plan process, these are the 4 priority sectors that we will be focusing on. You might be wondering why these 4 sectors. So basically, according to assessments that we have done since 2010, we have seen that these are the 4 main vulnerable sectors within the country. and you will realize that these 4 sectors are also the main key economic backbone of our country as well, in terms of agriculture products and in terms of transport, infrastructure, and health. So if you look at the National Adaptation Plan for Papua New Guinea in details, it sets out why we have selected these 4 sectors. So under these 4 priority sectors, you will see some of the activities that we plan to undertake. So basically, it's all there on the slide. Under agriculture, you will look at scaling up climate-smart agriculture best practices. So currently, we are linking up some of these priority areas with current projects that we have, like there's a project that we have under GGI, Global Green Growth Institute, that is looking at supporting 3 provinces in the country that looks at climate-smart agriculture practices. And then under infrastructure, you will see that we need to look at developing climate-resilient codes and standards with the Department of Works and Highways, so that when we are building our roads and bridges or constructing buildings, we would like to ensure that most of this infrastructure are climate-proofed. So we are working closely with the Department of Works and Highways to ensure that most of this infrastructure is climate-proofed. And for us under this sector as well, we have a program in Papua New Guinea called the Connect PNG. So we are trying to, as you know, or some of you may have known, PNG is a very rugged country with lots of mountains, rivers, and there's no flatland. It's mountainous, and most of our cities are accessed by only plane. You cannot travel by road. So through this Connect PNG program, the government has set aside about 100 billion kina to look at ensuring that they build roads, bridges to connect. They have identified economic corridors to connect different cities and towns. So we're trying to piggyback on that through the NAP to be able to support our Department of Works and Highways through that program to look at how we can climate-proof some of the work that's already ongoing. So currently, as I speak, there's construction happening, but it's just business as usual. So we are working closely with the Department of Works and Highways to look at how we can support them in terms of accessing funds from GCF, to look at how we can look at the incremental costs in terms of climate-proofing some of our infrastructures like roads. So that is one priority area, which priority activity which we are doing under this sector. Next slide. In terms of transport as well, we're also looking at some of the activities under almost similar in terms of codes and standards. We're also trying to develop e-mobility policy with the Department of Transport. So we've accessed some funding from the Green Climate Fund to look at accessing the readiness support to look at developing the e-mobility policy for PNG, because right now you can see that the world is transitioning into introduction of e-vehicles all around the world. So as a country, we are also looking at that option, and through this policy we can be able to try and look at transitioning from being moving away from fossil fuels, and then actually try and road test some of the technologies that that you and I are all aware of in terms of introducing e-vehicles. And the last sector, the health sector, basically looking at how we can look at evidence-based planning in terms of introducing adaptation strategies in the health sector, and of course trying to also, in line with what I've mentioned in the infrastructure sector, looking at climate-proofing some of the health infrastructure in terms of introduction of solar, or introduction of climate-proofing infrastructure to the health sector, especially in our rural areas. Next slide. So under our NDCs, these are some of the targets, adaptation targets. They look quite ambitious. I don't know whether we can achieve them in 2030, but that's set out in our NDCs, and we are working closely with the different sectors to ensure that, whatever activities that they implement tries to look at achieving some of the targets that are under our NDCs. We know that 2030 is just like 7 years away, but we're trying as much as possible to be able to try and implement what we can to be able to achieve some of these targets. We, under the National Adaptation Plan as well, apart from the 4 sectors that we are currently focusing on, we also have our cross-cutting adaptation strategies that touch some of these cross-cutting areas. Gender is one of them. As you can see, nature-based solutions is also one of them. Early warning systems and response measures is also one of them. So there's a list there that we would like to also, see this being implemented right across the 4 sectors. So this is just roughly a snapshot from the NAP, the implementation framework that we would like to implement. So as you can see, it's basically looking at ensuring that most of these sectors try as much as possible to cost out. We have identified that, these are the risks that have been identified within each of the sectors, but under the National Adaptation Plan, we've also developed our different tools in terms of cost-benefit analysis tools to ensure, what is the cost of adaptation within your sectors. So through this National Adaptation Plan program, we are also trying to look at training the sectoral leads, the sector expertise in agriculture to look at carrying out vulnerability needs assessments, using different technologies to collect data and information, and involving universities to look at how they can assist the sectors in terms of collecting risk data in the different risks that have been identified, to identify what is the cost like in terms of adaptation within each of the sectors. So that implementation framework just gives us a nutshell on how we would like to see that happen, and at the end of the day, trying to have a database which collects all that information so that, when it comes to reporting, reporting what are the risks, what are the percentages of population affected, what is the economic cost, that database can basically hold that information for the country, so that anyone who wants to do a project can come to the NAP database and basically retrieve information, identify the risk, and maybe propose interventions that they would like to provide to the country. Next slide. So these are some of the tools and the arrangements that we have at the national level in terms of having to look at how we can use some of these tools to identify the costs. So we have the cost methodologies and plans which our Department of National Planning and Budgetary have to cost out these areas. And like I mentioned earlier, we would like to also involve the universities and different research institutions within the country to ensure that, we cost out, what's it like to, implement, or what it is like to provide a particular intervention in terms of flooding, droughts, etc. So next slide. So this is probably the last 2 slides that I have. So some of the gaps and challenges that we have seen as, challenges that we have. One is looking at, we have limited resources to conduct wide vulnerability needs assessments. I think the one that I mentioned in 2010 is outdated, so I think we need to start looking at doing a countrywide vulnerability needs assessment for the country. And of course, capacity is one thing that's been mentioned in the room, having to train our national practitioners to look at carrying out, using these tools, the tools that we have developed under the NAP, to be used within the sectors. They must understand how these tools are used and be able to, put into context, what are the risks identified within the sectors and how they can cost it out, and then be able to tell us as Climate Change and Development Authority that, look, this is how much it costs us in terms of food security. And then, of course, improving our institutional arrangement. I think there's a lack of coordination within a lot of government agencies. So that's one area which we need to also look at. And of course, we have this biannual transparency report that we always report on. And I think there's a need for us to help build the capacity of some of these practitioners on how, our national practitioners can be able to build the capacity to ensure that they report on adaptation accurately. Next slide. I think some of the opportunities that we see is that, we have some funding still available under the GCF. Out of the 3 million readiness window that PNG had, we only accessed 1.7, which we developed this current NAP. I think we have another 1.3 remaining, so basically this could be focusing on financing strategy or looking at setting up an MRV system to track adaptation, because when you look at PNG's MRV system, it's more focused on mitigation, RED+, forestry, AFOLU sector. The other opportunity we see is that, there's a couple of proposals under the GCF country program, which we are currently in developing at this stage, and that are already aligned with the NAP. So we can see that as an opportunity for us to achieve some of those targets that we are looking at. And of course, there are existing programs in the country which we see as an opportunity, which, like the FAO CBIT program, which we see that, there could be an adaptation component that we can see FAO supporting under there as well. And then, of course, we have current technical support from GGGI, CFAN, Climate Finance Advisory Network, which we usually utilize to develop project proposals and that are currently under the GCF country program and that are currently linked with our national adaptation plans. And of course, just recently I saw the opportunity to also try and explore some of the programs like ICAT under UNEP, which we can also use to be able to try and develop systems in terms of monitoring, reporting, and verification in terms of as far as adaptation is concerned. So these are just some opportunities that we see that are available in the country, and we can usually use this to be able to address some of those challenges that we have. But some of these institutions have also very limited capacity in country. So sometimes we can only focus on certain areas, but not all the challenges that I have mentioned in my previous slide. So I think this is my final slide. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Jonah, for this comprehensive presentation, where I believe we will have lots of entry points by partner organizations to provide possible technical assistance. I would maybe ask colleagues in the room to give a very brief indication, because we have another presentation waiting and plan to have a discussion at the end. So very brief comments would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I can also wait maybe for the next presentation, but I'll be very quick. From our side, it's great to have seen that health has been one of the four main sectors. We actually have launched a global initiative which is called Attach. I will talk about it a bit later. But my question is, how could we further support maybe the drafting of a proposal to update a sectoral national adaptation plan for health based on this excellent work that you have presented? For example, I know that we need the verification of the national designated authority to get approval for drafting a health-focused proposal, for example. That is my first question. And the second one is, I would just like to ask whether this National Department of Health is situated within the Ministry of Environment or it is with the Environmental Department of the Ministry of Health. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonis. Do we have one more brief comment in the room? Okay, then Jonah, you can.
All right, thank you, colleague from WHO, for that intervention. First of all, Climate Change and Development Authority is the national designated authority to the GCF. If you are referring to the GCF in terms of project proposals. So we are the national designated authority, and I am the technical focal point. So my contact information is there. So basically, you can send me an email to look at, what are the needs and priorities that PNG has under health, and we can discuss that, whether it's a climate-proof in health infrastructure. I think we have a list of priorities which which need support from development partners. In terms of your question in relation to whether the Department of Health is under the environment, no, it's a separate government entity, the Department of Health. It has a ministry of its own under the Minister for Health. So, but under the Department of Health, they also have an environment branch, which liaises closely with the Climate Change and Development Authority. So if there's any issues in terms of environmental impact assessments in relation to health, they always liaise with us at the national level. So,
thanks very much, Jonah. And that's maybe also one important lesson, so to say, that we can already deduct from this presentation also, that this coordination and having such branches within ministries outside of the Ministry of Health is certainly helpful to facilitate the coordination. Thank you very much again. And with that, I would like to invite Agustin to present about the NAP implementation challenges in Paraguay. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak a little bit about the update National Plan of Paraguay. I'll try to be as brief as possible considering the time, but if you have any additional questions, or we can exchange emails later to provide more information. So please, next slide, please. Oh, just one before. There you go. So and just to give us a little context about the process for the update of the national plan, we have a first one, as Angela mentioned, in 2020. That was based in a previous version of the NDCs. We have a broad and really rich process for the update in 2021, which involved the definition of the establishment of the national of the NDC for mitigation, and the first adaptation communication for adaptation. processes. So we have a certain level of the redefinition of sectors and the process of governance and architecture of the adaptation process at national level, and we decide that we receive support for the updating process. The idea was basically to use the adaptation communication that was created in 21 and establish the national adaptation plan as an action plan of the communication to make it to give it more sense. It's just a continuous process for implementation. So this is just a basic structure we created. We also move forward the deadline for the implementation of actions to be aligned to the NDC in the communication, first national communication, which is both have the same time frame. If you could move to the next. So this is how adaptation is conceptualized in Paraguay. We basically define 7 prioritized sectors. These are based on the first NDC published in 2015 and then updated in 21. The process for defining or establishing a prioritized sector is based on a really complex structure of an interaction between different scales of actors at a national and subnational level. We have a National Commission of Climate Change, which is formed by 39 institutions, including ministries, all the ministries, and civil society, academy, and public sector in general, private and public sector in general. We made a lot of exchanges to try to define these sectors, and 26 objectives that were the base of the planning process for the NAP. These actions also include cross-cutting elements that were used during the analysis, identification of prioritization of actions and needs, and we're having this sectoral approach. So climate, cities and communities, resilient, actually I just made it shorter, are based in the improvement of infrastructure and creating capacity at city and community level to deal with impacts of climate change. So for example, like river streams or floods, heat waves, those kind of things. And as well as creating this local capacity to take actions against impacts of climate change. With health and epidemiology, we have strong work with the Ministry of Health. They have a interesting system for monitoring diseases at a national level, especially vector-borne diseases, and some of diseases related to heat waves as well, which is one of the main sources of spread, many of the sources of some cardiac diseases, and then as well as we're talking about vector-borne diseases that are spread around across the country. So the idea was to use this perspective of adaptation to see how to incorporate adaptation into this process and climate change impacts as well, and see how we can incorporate those variables for analysis during the national assessments. Ecosystem and biodiversity, the idea is to we have really weak ecosystems, particularly wetlands and some forests. We realize that the monitoring process of these these ecosystems is really weak, and we need to focus more, give again this perspective of climate change into this process. Not in this sense, this is not a sector that is focused in people. This is more on ecosystems directly and the impacts of climate change to it. Energy, because I don't know if many of you know, but Paraguay is completely the energy base is hydroelectric energy. So we really need our rivers to work naturally and efficiently, and obviously making sure that the droughts, again, that is one of the many impacts that we see creating more impacts again to our country need to be assessed. So and as well, we need to make sure that access to energy is especially made to those most vulnerable. We have a lot of really rural and vulnerable communities, including small farmers and indigenous communities. As well, agriculture and forestry. We are all about the food security. We're talking about this sector as well is focused for one hand on strengthening the capacity of rural communities, small farmers, indigenous communities to face climate change, especially again related to droughts and floods and some heat waves that are affecting the production of food, and as well the industrial sector, because it's affecting the same way per a larger scale. Water resources. This is kind of, I would like to say, like a cross-cutting sector as well, because each of the countries, because droughts are one of the major impacts. It's affecting like to all the sectors. But again, we have a recently developed water law that creates this legal framework to work from a local to national level on climate change management and protection. And water management and protection. And we need to strengthen those capacities to be able to have like real capacity to assess and protect these resources at a national level. And transportation, just to like, as well, we are a landlocked country. Having access to rivers is key for us to be able to do anything, trade, and even just move around the country. So we try to take these cross-cutting elements as a way to implement the analysis, and some of in different levels they serve as the purpose, but it is a work in progress. Let's say we'll probably make sure that it's more robust for the next updating processes. Can I go next, please? This is the basic architecture of what I just tried to explain. We created sorry for the acronyms. We know that climate change, people love this, so bear with me, please. So we have this is the architecture of climate change, the NAPs implementation. Basically, we try to align all the policies as much as we can. We have the National Development Plan, which is on the right of the outcome and NAP. The NDP is based on the SDGs, so it's kind of like creates all these sectorial as well targets and for the country. So the first idea is to align those to the adaptation communication, which is the larger framework that creates the strategies and the actions and the priorities that will be downscaled in the NAP. The process of the outcome was very challenging, as I mentioned. They created like 26 national objectives that were then segregated in like 1,000 and something actions for to all the sectors mentioned before. The idea is because unfortunately we don't have. I mean, Paraguay doesn't have the financial capacity to implement all these actions. We try to align whatever we can from the sectoral planning and strategic planning from public sector. This means that we try to connect as much as possible what the other ministries are doing that is related to climate change, because either way, even if we don't implement climate action, those problems still exist, and they are treated in different ways from different ministries. So we're trying to make the exercise of aligning those processes as much as possible, and identifying the gaps that we cannot finance with public budget. So wherever we can, we do it through there. Then we have at a local level, we have sustainable development plans and land management plans, which are the ways in which districts at a local level organize and create planning processes based on community level needs and priorities, and design implementation actions. They usually, this instrument that is in the middle in some national, the sustainable development plans and the land management plan, is usually related to funds directed to the directed to the local levels. So we try to do kind of like the same exercise that we did with the sectoral plans. Again, it's a work in progress. We are receiving feedbacks and providing support and technical and financial support as much as we can. And we're trying to build a better process from there now, because as many as you probably know, downscaling adaptation action at a national level, from national to local level, can be really challenging, creating this framework, enabling conditions to be able to do those. So we're still working on it.
Agustin?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. If you could maybe highlight 2 to 3 points where you would really appreciate some technical assistance, because we have to unfortunately wrap up in a few minutes.
Okay, yes, I'm just going to move forward. So not to go to all the process from the 26 objectives that I mentioned, I'm just going to focus on enabling conditions. If you can move forward, please. So just to give some examples of technical support that we can get. Sorry, can you go back, please? When I talk about finance in enabling conditions, even though we are talking about finance for implementation action, we definitely need finance for particular projects to national levels and sectorial projects as well, as we don't have the capacity to do all as a government process. But again, we need to strengthen the local capacities to receive support, because right now the national government doesn't have the total capacity to receive funds and spread it across the different regions and districts. When we talk about institutional agreements, we're more talking about arrangements. To be honest, we still need to develop these sectorial arrangements with different institutions. They are connected, they are participating, but we need to formalize those and create these information systems that can interconnect the information in relation to action and support implemented at a national level with sectoral actors. Again, when we talk about technology transfer, the main concerns at the moment is implementing national structure to assess sectoral vulnerability and impacts. Our system of vulnerability and impacts assessments is still very weak at a national level. We depend a lot of information from other actors or for participatory process in designing and in defining action. So we need to strengthen that in a national level, which is again aligned to the national warning systems that we have it. At a national level, it doesn't have complete range of work, and we need to again restructure in a way that can integrate climate action into the analysis process, and action process. Just capacity building in general, and this is interlinked as well with finance, capacity building for assessment vulnerability at national level. We still depend a lot of international cooperation to create those analyses in a robust way. We would like to have that capacity at national level, and if it's possible, to local level as well. And again, the project development and implementation of climate action, we still have a strong dependency of international cooperation in regarding to elaborating and preparing and implementing projects. This is not only at a national level, but again, if we're talking about downscaling projects at a local level, we need to strengthen those capacities and create capacity in the local governments and institutions that can bring those complex dynamics especially coming from the UNFCCC funds to reality in a national level. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Agustin. I think we learned a lot about also institutional arrangements that are needed for NAP implementation. I have one input from WIPO.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. In terms of the support that WIPO could provide, WIPO Green specifically provides matchmaking between those seeking green technologies and those providing them. So technology providers, but also organizations that can implement specific solutions. And at our disposal, we have a database of about 120,000 green technologies, and many of them relate to many of the sectors that you mentioned today and address many of the challenges related to food security and water security. And we also recently started working on something called the Green Technology Book. And in its first edition, it's focused specifically on adaptation technologies and solutions related to cities, water and coastal regions, and agriculture. So it would be really interesting to explore how we could bring, that work that we're doing in terms of technology identification into the NAP implementation process, especially as Alexander mentioned, that we need both long-term strategies but also immediate action. And we also provide actually acceleration projects, a smaller number of projects to scale and implement green technologies on the ground.
Thank you, and I believe we have maybe 1 minute, so let's say 2 30-second interventions on very concrete offers of support by partners.
Okay, then I take floor again on behalf of UNU. Some of the questions that Papua New Guinea representative and Paraguay presented, we are very happy to support the process, particularly on vulnerability assessment and national level capacity transfer. Thank you.
Thank you, Manchu, and UNDR.
Yes, thanks, Angela. And thank you for the presentation. Just to briefly mention the UNDR UNFCCC initiative on comprehensive risk management that is seeking for synergy between disaster reduction, national plans, and national adaptation plans for climate change. There's a lot of material on the UNDR website, and please, if you want to come and have a conversation with me after the meeting, I can give you some details, but the idea is also taking into account that the climate change is a kind of catalyzer for disaster, and disasters are affecting the adaptive capacity of countries and communities. So it makes sense to integrate actions in climate change adaptation and disaster reduction. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. And we will, of course, make all the presentations available on the event website and encourage also partners, in case there are additional points to what was said now, to communicate this with us. And with this, I would like to thank you all and wish you a good rest of the SB 58. Thank you.